Hey, how are you today? This is Josh Patrick, and you're at Cracking the Cash Flow Code. And today you are in for a real treat. Our guest today is Jay Guilford. He is formerly with Cirque Du Soleil. He was the guy responsible for putting together their leadership program there. And if you know anything about Cirque Du Soleil, I hope you know what Cirque Du Soleil is first. It's the premier circus, changed the world of circuses. If you've not been to a show, you got to go because they are just ridiculously great. I'm a huge fan of Cirque, not only for the performances, I'm a huge fan of the way they ran their company, the way they treated their people, and how they did leadership. Now, we might think that leadership for Cirque is only about the people on the stage. Not true. So let's bring Jay on, and we're going to start talking about that right now. Hey, Jay, how are you today?
Hey, Josh, thanks so much for having me.
I am thrilled to have you here. So, Cirque du Soleil, is just an extraordinary experience. And to get there, it didn't happen by mistake. They had great leadership along the way. You're the guy that was responsible for putting that together. What'd you do?
Well, at Cirque, one of the things that I did was led the development of Cirque du Soleil's corporate training program. And actually, that was mostly outward facing, Josh. So I'd gotten to Cirque at a point where they knew what they were doing and why. And over my 6+ years, I've left since then to found my own thing. But in my 6 years there, I helped take those learnings and deliver them to Fortune 500 and a lot of Fortune 100 companies. So what we did was we strapped executives on to the apparatuses and we flew them high across the Cirque du Soleil skies. It wasn't just fun and games. We did that because those executives wanted to learn about collaboration, communication, teamwork, and healthy risk taking in a very different way. And that was important because those executives had gone to the institutes and symposiums and they had done all the other stuff. So they wanted to really ignite their teams and reignite their leadership. And to be strapped into a cerceau and work with a contortionist is very different from sitting in a boardroom and talking about leadership and trust.
So, when you were doing your leadership programs, what was the hardest thing for you to get across to those folks you were, trying to say, okay, there's a different way of thinking about things?
I won't say hardest thing, but some of the lessons that people learned was one of the major lessons was how to take a competitor and make them a collaborator. If you can imagine that we at Cirque, when I was there, we got people from competitive gymnastics and other competitive worlds. A lot of times, those people who were competing against each other 3 years ago are now on the stage together and they have to collaborate. And what's interesting about that is that people often think that a gymnast is a natural performer. Gymnasts are highly technical. They're not performers. They don't necessarily smile. They don't emote. So, how do you take that technical competitor and make them a collaborator? And that's a transferable lesson across any corporation. When you're onboarding team members, maybe they worked for a competing firm, or maybe they're working in a place where they're competing for commissions. So how do you help them collaborate when there is a level of competition on teams?
Okay, so I'll bite. How do you go about doing that?
Well, there's an extensive, for like any other organization, you have to have a very extensive and considerate onboarding process, one that teaches the skills people need to have. I think it was different from for Cirque because you were jumping on someone's shoulders. So you wanted to collaborate with them and they wanted to collaborate with you. So you taught all the ways that you needed to work together towards the more common goal, which is to dazzle audiences all around the world. So I would say for organizations, when you're bringing in those team members who should have a level of go-get-itness and competition, what is the larger goal and what are they working towards? And you center all of your efforts around that.
So that makes me think about one of my favorite subjects, which is values.
Yeah. Yes.
And it appears to me that if you don't have common values, it's almost impossible to work towards a common goal. Does that make any sense?
It does make sense. I have a rant about values, though. I think many small
Okay,
and medium
let's
sized.
hear your rant.
Here you go, because you're going to hear many small and medium sized businesses don't think about core values until it's too late. But even for a lot of those businesses, they are just words on a wall, and they have to be more than that. Are you familiar with Netflix's Freedom and Responsibility document?
Yes.
Well, Netflix, they broke the internet in 2009 because they did have core values, but they translated them down into behaviors. How can I see that my leaders and team members are living those core values? And that's the difference. There's one, I actually wrote it down because I thought it was so great. Netflix has one, a core value about judgment. That is really generic, but they go further and they say judgment is you being able to say what you're working towards and what you're not working towards. That's super specific. So values have to be
Well,
translated into behaviors.
there's a key there. I mean, you've hit a couple of things about values. I just want to point them out for the folks who are listening because they're really, really key. One, if you don't have a clarifying statement around what your value is, nobody knows what the heck you're talking about.
Exactly.
Two, if you're not using your values at least 3 to 5 times a day for at least a year or two, nobody's going to believe you. And three, if you call a core value something that's an aspirational value, you're seen as a liar in your company, especially if it's a blue collar business. And if it's an aspirational value, that's good. Just say it.
Yes. Yeah. And what are the behaviors? That's the most important part to me.
Yeah,
You
well,
have the values on the wall. What are the behaviors?
yeah. I used to own a food service and vending company that fed people in factories.
Mhm.
And every quarter we'd have an appreciation day, an appreciation meeting where anybody had an anniversary. We go in and say, okay, this person had the anniversary, they've been here for 5 years. But the important thing for me, the most important thing for that meeting was I had to tie their behavior to a core value and talk about it in front of
Exactly.
everybody else in the company.
Yeah.
It was magical when we did that.
Yeah. But Josh, I would also ask, what do businesses do when you have employees, but I would also say leaders who aren't living up to those core values? Are you putting actions behind your words?
Well, you have to have a conversation to give them a chance to correct, and most of them don't, and they have to leave the company, in my
Wow. Yeah.
opinion.
Me too. I think if they're your values, you have to value them. I think anyone listening should go and read Netflix's Freedom and Responsibility document because it is the preeminent document for you to learn from.
Yeah, it's really one of these really truly important things. I mean, when we talk about, well, let me ask you something about leadership, because this is one of these questions you read. I used to read this all the time. I finally got to be really sick of it. But are leaders born or leaders made?
I think made. I think anyone can be taught leadership skills. I think the reason why we have that conversation is from my work with Fortune 500 companies and really small companies too. What I've seen is that leaders are thrown into high stakes situations without the tools to handle them. I had a situation where a chief human resources officer called me because his leaders, his executives weren't handling the layoffs well. And I had to ask two questions. One, did you train them on protocol to lay off employees? And two, did you give them tools to manage their emotions and the emotions of others around this? And Josh, you know what the answer was? No.
Yeah, it was no and no.
So you can train leaders on these skills, but you have to anticipate what they need. So they
Yeah,
can be made.
in my experience, well, I'm like the poster child for that because I was the worst leader that ever existed,
Oh,
and I got all the way up to okay because I learned what it takes to become a reasonably good leader, and I adopted the skills, and I was not afraid to make a lot of mistakes to learn along the way.
yeah.
And
And
that's,
I think that's the part. Yeah. We have to let them make the mistakes. We have to give them the training and we have to hold them accountable.
well, Jay, I want to ask you another question here. There's a word that I think is underused in the world of business, and that word is vulnerability. Where does vulnerability play in the work that you've done with developing leaders?
That's such a great question. Vulnerability, I think leaders have to be willing to say that they don't know yet. So for me in my work, I've worked with people who are, I think, high profile leaders. Their names are on buildings or equipment or the packages we see on grocery store shelves. And I would say the very go-get-itness that got them there, the assertiveness, is the very thing they don't need if they want to connect with their teams. So the leaders have to be vulnerable to say, I have one or two great skills. I'm bold and I'm passionate, but I understand that I'm doing something wrong because I'm not connecting with my team in the way that they need. So the vulnerability is really about, I think, a self-awareness and understanding that I might be making some mistakes and I'm going to correct them.
Yeah, my experience is the people that work with us, our team members, want the leaders and the people they're working for and with to be authentic.
Mhm.
And in my experience, the only way that you can be authentic is by letting your hair down a little bit and saying, I'm not perfect, and talk about your warts.
Yeah.
There's
Yes.
a thing with public speaking. They teach you when you're doing public speaking to do what they call an origin story. And I see two types of origin stories. One is you tell about all the things you did wrong and how you fixed it along the way. And the other is you tell an origin story about all your wins and forget about all the learning experiences you had.
Exactly.
And you know which one is more effective.
Yeah, I mean, even for me, I'll tell one now. I made huge mistakes at Cirque. One of the key mistakes I made was not being prepared as a leader. I remember going into a production meeting at Michael Jackson 1, and I'm sitting at this big table with heads of department. These people had worked with Britney Spears and Michael Jackson and the Miss America pageant. And they started to ask me questions about my agenda items, and I couldn't give them the answers. And then someone pulled me aside later. They said, Jay, you looked really scattered in that meeting. Never under any circumstance can you ever come to our meetings like that. So, yeah, being honest about those mistakes is really important because, Josh, a lot of times they're public and your team members see them anyway. So you may as well just be honest, be vulnerable, and make the change.
And the truth is, we never learn by doing it right anyhow.
No.
Uh,
Yeah.
If we get it
Well, I
right, it's an accident the first time.
Well, I jumped on a bike the first time and I rode straight through. No, I didn't. No one, no one does. So you're exactly right.
It's sort of like, it's one of our mantras that we like to use around here is fail fast, fail cheap.
Hmm.
And essentially that means there's lots of small experiments you do, and most of them don't work. Most of them are mistakes. So you learn from them, you make slight corrections, and over time you start building on that success and you learn. Which speaks, that are you familiar with a term called appreciative inquiry?
No, but tell me more.
Okay, appreciative inquiry is where instead of focusing on the mistakes or what's going wrong in your company, you focus on what's going right and you magnify it and you learn to manage or fix mistakes that have to be fixed. But the real advantage in going forward is what are we doing right? How do we make it
Yes.
better?
Hmm.
I mean, I think Cirque has been like a poster child for that over the years. I mean, if you look at the early shows and the later shows, they learned a lot along the way.
Yeah. And I think for any organization, it's about leveraging your strengths. You see that with Uber. One thing that I loved about Uber early on was the core values. They had very specific core values, such as super pumped, or one of their core values, be an owner, not a renter. And one of their core values was step on toes. And you saw it in their business model. You saw that they hired people who were willing to step on toes in many cities and break laws and fork over the tens of millions of dollars so that we can order cars and food on our phone. So you have to be clear about who you are.
And you also want to be careful when you're stepping on toes that you don't destroy your company as uh, Uber tried to do. So,
Yeah, I mean, if you're in a highly regulated industry, you might want to think differently about that. But there is some type of egg breaking that has to come if you want to be creative, if you want to be innovative, if you want to penetrate new markets. You're going to have to break some eggs.
yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, even in the insurance or the investment business, which is part of what we do, is that it's you don't want to break laws, but you do want to say, can I do this, and what's preventing me from doing so?
Yeah.
Uh, you might
Yeah, and
want
I
to
was.
talk to a regulator before you start, but
Mhm. But we just had a session a month ago with the financial services firm, and one of the things that we offer a workshop on creativity and innovation, and one of the things that we saw was that people were afraid to break rules. Yes, you should not in highly regulated industries, but you're not breaking a rule when you put an idea on a whiteboard. So you have to start
Right.
somewhere. There has to be a level of daringness of ideas. So in our workshop, we talked about, and we walked them through, you can put this idea up there. It's not breaking a law. And as we saw in the last 2 years, things change around you, whereas the laws shift and change. In a highly regulated industry, no, you better not break those laws, but it's not breaking a law. Just to put up all the ideas, throw everything against the wall and see what sticks.
Great thing. So I love innovation is one of my favorite topics to talk about. So let's pivot there for
Uh-huh.
a second or
Yeah.
two. Can innovation be systematized?
I think it can be culturalized or leadershipatized. I think that you can create scenarios or the atmosphere in your organization where people are constantly innovating. Google was known for letting their engineers use 30% of their time to create whatever they wanted. And then they created Gmail and AdSense. So, what I've told leaders is that you have to create a safe space where everyone can come to you with ideas. So if you have a culture that is about bullying and competitiveness and land grabbing and politicking, then people are not going to be creative. Like you can't hold a gun to someone's face as a leader and say paint a Picasso. It has to feel like a safe space. So I don't know if it can be systematized, but I do know that you can create cultures where people are fearless in suggesting ideas, and that's part of innovation.
So here's another question on innovation.
Yeah.
Is innovation can innovation be an internal activity as well as an external activity?
Yeah, I think it's both. One thing that I suggest to organizations often is to look at models that are well outside of your subject matter expertise. Like if you're in construction, look at consumer packaged goods or entertainment or media, because you're going to learn a lot from industries that are way outside of your comfort zone or way outside of your lane. So I think there's an external part to it, but I also think internally, your leadership has to build the type of culture that feels safe for you.
So let's make another pivot for a second. How do you make the leap from employee to entrepreneur? And I think this is something that this is a question that, Michael Gerber likes to say, a lot of people who are private business owners are technicians that had an entrepreneurial cramp, which
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think is the best line he ever came up with. But how do you make that trick? I'm an employee. I've got a great idea, or I don't like what my boss is doing. I think I can do it better. How do you make that leap?
Well, it can be a big leap or a small leap. I left from Cirque and now 4 years ago, and I have a consulting firm, and it's going pretty well. It's thriving, and I would say first talk to other entrepreneurs and ask yourself, are you able to do the things that they do? And I'm not talking about the technical stuff. I'm talking about, can you handle uncertainty? Can you engage in business development activity? Are you able to hold yourself accountable when there's no one looking over your shoulder? Can you work outside of a structure? And then you have to see if you have those attributes. Because for me, dealing with the uncertainty is a big part of entrepreneurship. When you're in an organization where you're being fed clients or customers, or you're getting a paycheck that someone's printing out or digitally giving to you, then there's a level of certainty. When you jump into entrepreneurship, there's a level of uncertainty. So I would say the first thing is ask yourself if you have those attributes. The second thing I would say, though, is to keep your ideas to yourself until they're fully germinated, because otherwise you risk going out there talking about something and then someone who's not a visionary shooting it down, and then you lose your confidence. So have some trusted advisors that can help you out, but I would keep that idea to myself about my entrepreneurship until it's fully germinated.
And I would add, never talk about your dream of being in your own business with people who are employees. They just don't get it.
Mm, yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
have this thing about work-life balance, which doesn't exist in my opinion. I call it work-life integration. And the only people I've ever heard talk about work-life balance are people who don't own businesses that think business owners have a terrible work-life balance. Not
Mhm.
true. Most of them have a pretty good work-life integration where they take their personal and their business and they integrate the two. And I would really like to see folks who own private businesses get way less sensitive about that issue.
And Josh, I agree. Even for me and my partners, I have 4 partners in my firm. and we talk about projects. We don't talk about work. So oftentimes I'm engaged in a project over the weekend, and someone might say Jay is working over the weekend, but it's integration. When you are in love with what you're doing as an entrepreneur, then it doesn't feel like work.
Yeah, that's been my
Mhm,
experience over the
mhm.
years. And the
Yeah.
other thing is you have to really learn how to develop trust in others because you can't learn to delegate unless you trust other people. And you
Mhm.
can't grow unless you learn how to delegate. It's sort of like
Yes.
those, like a chicken and an egg thing. And I mean, if you look at there's 28 million businesses in the United States, only 6 million have any employees, and only 300,000 do over $5 million in sales.
Yeah.
The reason is the people who own the company say, I have to do it myself because I can't trust the other folks here to make a mistake.
Mhm. Yeah. And that's good for leadership internally and externally. What I see with new leaders or with leaders who are super powerful and confident in themselves is sometimes they don't want to give over that authority. They will delegate the task. You can do their calendar or you can do their expense reports, but you also have to delegate that authority. You have to trust that others are able to do some things as good as you or better than you. And then you better trust them to go do it. You better trust them to go because you can't. I mean, you can only grow so much. You can only syndicate yourself so much.
Yeah, well, there's the whole thing with responsibility and authority. A lot of times I've seen folks, they give somebody a responsibility, but they never give them the authority to actually make what they're getting the responsibility to do become real. And when you do that, you're setting up the person you're delegating to failure.
Yeah. The best leaders explain the vision and within the guidelines of the organization, let people get there however they want. You know, we're
Yeah,
going over
that's
there. You can take a boat or a plane or a helicopter. I don't care. Just get over there in 35 minutes. I don't care how you do it. Yeah.
and it might be different than the way you would do it, and that's okay. There isn't only
Yeah.
one way to get to
Yeah.
the other side of the river.
Yeah, we just, I mean, I told you I just got off a call and we had produced some training sessions for an organization and they were apologetic in saying that they hired some new employees and they wanted to tweak the training. And me and one of my partners, we were like, great, make it better. We're not, we're not beholden to what we've done. And I guess I would say for leaders listening, ask yourself that, do you want it done your way or do you want it done the best way? And the top performing organizations get it done the best way.
Yeah, no question about that.
Mm.
Hey, Jay, unfortunately, we are out of time. And
Oh,
I'm going to bet there are some people who are going to die to have a conversation with your company or maybe you if they're the right people. So, where would they go to do that?
well, I'm a big fan of just putting it out there. So sometimes people text me. You can don't spam me, but you can text me at 646-386-6558. And I do respond to the text. Or you can also reach out to me at jay@coworkslead.com. That's JAY at COWORKSLEAD.com. I do a lot of fireside chats like this for organizations. I do keynotes. And the training on creativity and innovation has been a real hit. So that's in person. So I have to come to you because there's some interactivity, but we do all that stuff. Thanks a lot, Josh.
My pleasure. And I've got two things I'd like you to do.
Uh,
One is wherever you're listening to this podcast, and you've heard me say it now 350 some odd times, please give us an honest rating review. And while you're at it, subscribe to the podcast. People like it. We have these neat conversations almost every single week. And so I'd love to have you be a subscriber to our show. Second thing is I've written two books. My second book is out in the wild. It's called The Sale Ready Company. It's a continuation of our first book where the Aardvark family is now going through a process where John, the owner, is thinking about transitioning himself out of the business. So he has to figure out who's going to own it. Can he afford to sell it? Who can he afford to sell it? Who should run the company and how should the company be run? These are all sorts of questions that you want to do. And the big one, what's next for John after he leaves the company? Because we want to try to manage seller's remorse. He's not going to get rid of it, but we probably can manage it. It's really easy to get. You just go to www.salereadycompany.com and you can buy the book there. I'm selling for $7.95. It retails for $14.95. And I've got 5 or 6 bonuses that come along with it. And if you're really brave and interested, you can get a free 20-minute conversation with me. I will guarantee you'll get at least one piece of take-home value you can apply in your company today. Hey, this is Josh Patrick with Jay Guilford. You're at Cracking the Cash Flow Code. Thanks a lot for stopping by. I hope to see you back here really soon.